I don't usually do this kind of thing, but I'd fallen behind in my studies. I've always been an honor roll student. I had some B's here and there, but mostly fantastic grades. I wasn't big into extracurricular activities, but I was a library assistant, and I did a little volunteer work for the required hours I needed to graduate. That all changed when I turned 17. My parents had gotten me a car for my birthday. Nothing fancy, but 4 wheels and an engine is always nice. But it came with a caveat. If I wanted to drive it, I needed to pay the insurance on it. This led me to pick up a job, which led to a lot of closing shifts at my local fast food chain and not a lot of time for studying or doing homework. So when Mr. Castleberry told me I was going to fail 12th grade English if I didn't bring my grades up, I asked him if there wasn't something we could do to work this out. I admit extra credit, maybe a makeup assignment or retake a test, but it seemed he had other ideas. He looked around as if what we were going to talk about was likely to get him in trouble, and then he scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to me. When I asked him what it was, he told me to open it when I got to my car, not to tell anybody. He refused to say anything else about it after that, and as I sat in the front seat of my car reading the message, I was a little weirded out. I mean, you saw these sorts of situations in adult films or in the back of Hustler magazines, but you really never thought it would happen in real life. Meet me at my house at 7:30, before sunset. Be prepared to stay till dawn. I started to go back in and tell him there was no way in hell, but I needed this particular class to graduate. Who knows, maybe he just liked to hang out with his students in the middle of the night. I didn't believe that for a second, but I decided that it was worth looking into. If I wasn't comfortable with it, I could always take the bad grade and figure something else out. It worked out pretty good because I was off that night, and Mr. Castleberry lived about 15 minutes from my house. I pulled up outside his house at about 7:15 and saw him peeking out the curtains as I came up to knock. He threw the door open, looking around as if to see if I'd been followed, and then practically pulled me inside by the front of my shirt as he closed and locked the door. He threw about 4 different locks, as well as a chain, and then told me to follow him to the bedroom. I raised an eyebrow. This was a little fast, but I did as he asked and figured we would talk over the particulars once we got there. When I stepped into the bedroom, I noticed that Mr. Castleberry had an odd setup. His bed sat in the middle of a circle that I had a sneaking suspicion might be silver. The walls were covered in holy symbols, and Mr. Castleberry was finishing a circle of salt around the bed as I took it all in. He pursed his lips, clearly not sure how to begin, and sat down on the bed as he tried to figure out how to explain. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll try to be quick. I have a demon inside me, a demon that only comes out after sunset. Bull, I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face was stone cold serious. Hand of God. That's what the circle and the salt is for. I have people I know who come and sit with me and make sure the demon doesn't escape somehow. But sometimes I have to ask my students to stand in. I just need you to sit here and watch me until dawn. After that, you'll have your A. I sighed, thinking this over. It appeared he didn't want anything sexual, but he was certainly after something weird. Mr. Castleberry had always seemed like such a normal guy. Who would have thought he was clearly some kind of weirdo who thought he was possessed by a demon or something? Whatever, I thought. An A was an A, and I needed to pass the class. Okay, so what do I do if this thing gets out? Mr. Castleberry was getting comfy in bed. There's a box beside your chair. Use what's in there. The gun is a last resort. The bullets in it are very expensive, so I hope you're a good shot. Don't call the police and don't invite anyone over. You got that? I nodded, reaching down beside the chair and finding the box as he got comfortable. Good. Sun's going down, so it won't be long. Oh, the demon will try to tempt you. Just make sure you don't listen to anything he has to say. There's earplugs in the box, but I don't recommend you use anything electronic to block him out. Why not? I asked, taking a battered old Bible and cross out of the box. The gun inside was a heavy old revolver, and It looked like it would blow a hole through a barn if I used it. There were earplugs, a spray bottle labeled HW that I assumed would hurt the demon too. When Mr. Castleberry didn't answer, I asked him again as I looked up. He was lying on the bed, arms crossed over his chest as he mouthed the words to a prayer I didn't know. He was speaking in Latin or Spanish or something, and as the sun got lower, he seemed to be fighting to finish it. His tongue was getting heavy, his words growly, and he was twitching like an epileptic. As the sun slid down the horizon and true dark overtook the town, his eyes popped open, and I heard a sound like someone popping all their vertebrae at once. He roared like a charging rhino, and his body contorted on the bed like someone being flayed alive. I jumped as he writhed on the bed, knocking over the chair as I went for the door. I needed to call the hospital. This was beyond a joke. He needed help. "No!" Mr. Castleberry forced out. "Don't leave. Stay till dawn. Only wait." But that appeared to be all I would get from Mr. Castleberry. He went limp then, falling back on the bed as a soft and satisfying growl left him. As he lay there, I watched as his chest rose and fell. What was going on with him? Was he actually possessed? I shook that thought off. I had been raised Catholic, but the older I got, the less sure I was that God even existed. If there was no God, then there was no devil, so there were no demons either. That meant that the school board was just letting someone like Mr. Castleberry teach kids with whatever mental illness he had going on, probably schizophrenia or multiple personalities or something. I didn't know, but if I had to stay here all night to get an A, then I supposed I would. I was going to be tired at work tomorrow, but I had Sunday off, so I could always recuperate then.
Ah, yes. The Sabbath is a good day to rest. It was good enough for the Almighty, at least. So I suppose it's good enough for you, too. I felt my breath stick in my throat. The voice I had heard from the bed had been as different from Mr. Castleberry's as sandpaper was to velvet. Whoever was talking sounded like the kind of people who do the kind of ASMRs that get you banned on YouTube. It was the kind of voice that lures kids into wells, kind of voice that lures women away from happy marriages, kind of voice that leaves men questioning their sexuality. I looked up to find Mr. Castleberry reclined on the bed, his head resting on his hand in what was likely supposed to be a seductive pose. His eyes were smoldering, something I hadn't thought them capable of, and his smile was predatory. He was sizing me up like a predator preparing to spring, and I felt my skin erupt in goosebumps. Mr. Castleberry? It laughed, and I felt like I should join it, but forced myself not to. The old man has gone to bed, but you can talk to me if you want. My name is Satan. I scoffed. No way in hell. I'm sure Satan has better things to do than bother my English teacher. Very astute. The Spanish girl he brought in last time screamed and ran out of the room when I told her that. I see you have a thicker skin, though. You may call me Raish, and what may I call you? I started to tell him, but I seemed to remember something about telling a demon your name and decided not to give him my real name. Sam, I said, earning a wide, toothy grin from the imp. Astute and cagey. I like that. So how about you break that salt circle and let me out? I'm sure we could have some fun before this old fuddy-duddy gets up. Wouldn't the silver hold you inside too? I asked dubiously. Raish peeked over the bed and chuckled. That crafty old duck. Who knew he could afford that much silver on a teacher's budget? Well, no matter. If you step inside the circle, breaking it with your foot, then it isn't a circle, and I can come out. Come on. What do you say? Found myself considering it. I had actually prepared to stand up when I realized what I was doing. I didn't really know anything about this creature, a change my mind had made from mental disease to creature, and I was just going to trust him? No, I didn't think so. I planted my bottom and shook my head. I don't think so, I said, and was surprised to find that I was almost apologetic. Ray shrugged. Of course not. Why would you release me for free? Why wouldn't you want to get something out of this after all? So what is it you want? What is this old man offering you to keep watch over me? I floundered, finally deciding on the truth. An A in his English class. It sounded lame, and when Raish laughed, I knew he had thought so too. A meaningless mark of completion. I could make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. Get you any one person, any 12 people you desire, or set you up in such a way that not graduating from school would be the least of your worries. I could do so much for you, and I don't even need to take your soul. I just need you to free me. It's been so long since I was free to roam the night, and I'm so very hungry. He had been weaving a spell around me, drawing me into his promises, but at last brought me back to my senses. What would this thing do if it got loose? Who would it hurt if it was just allowed to roam the night? I shook my head, trying to get the invasive words out of my skull, and when I turned back, Mr. Castleberry, or Raish, or whoever he was, looked disappointed. A pity. I really could have done more for you than this old stick. I ignored him after that, though he did not return the favor. I'd brought some books so I could work on my homework, but he was talking too much for me to concentrate. I spent a few hours trying to complete my geometry homework while he offered to help, offered to give me the answers, offered to do things I'd rather not think about, and 100 other such offers. He also threatened me, offered 1,000 different punishments for not letting him out, only to walk them back a moment later and apologize. I checked my watch as I finally closed the book and discovered it was only 10:30. I'd been at this for 3 hours and didn't seem to be going by quickly. Only 8 more hours till sunrise, he said, guessing the source of my sighs. Plenty of time for you to change your mind. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the earplugs, pushing them in and taking my American history homework out. 2 hours of mostly silence later, I put it away and looked up to find Raish looking at me a little too intently. I yawned, getting sleepy as I pulled out my phone and scrolled through TikTok. I couldn't hear it, and as I reached for my headphones, I remembered what Mr. Castleberry had said. He had warned me about using electronic headphones, but I figured one probably would be fine. Besides, they had noise reduction on them. That had to count for something. Raish tried to call out to me when I swapped the earplug for a headphone, but I ignored him as I popped it in. I was listening to a 2-minute story about something or another, but as I scrolled to the next one, I was surprised to find it was a live stream from a familiar room. I could see myself sitting there, face glued to the phone, but as I watched, Raish looked straight at the camera and smiled. I was infuriated. Mr. Castleberry was just live streaming himself as he scared some dumb kid of the week. In fact, the title of the stream was High School Kid Tormented by Demon,
though demon was in air quotes. He had tricked me. Why would he do that?
Why indeed?
Raish asked, staring at me through the camera as if he could see me through the phone.
What do you owe him? He made a fool of you online. What if your friends saw this? What would they think? You'd be a social outcast. Why not give them something to watch? I bet you'd love nothing more than to wrap your hands around this fool's throat and choke the life out of him. Do it. No one would know. Just walk over here and...
I was getting up, but as I took a step towards the bed, alarm bells rang in my head. Raish was messing with me. Looking back down at my phone, I could see it was just a generic TikTok shop stream. And when I looked back up, Raish was so close that his nose was pressed against the barrier.
Come on, just one more step, and you can do whatever you want to him. Kill him, kiss him, do his laundry. I don't care. Just let me out, he bellowed,
and I stumbled back into my chair as he laughed. After that, I just watched TikTok with the subtitles on. I didn't trust my ears anymore. I made it till 2, but after that, my yawns started to sneak up on me. I wished I'd brought an energy drink or something. I wasn't used to staying up this late, not regularly, and my eyes were getting heavy. I swapped over to an adventure game on my phone, but it kept slipping longer and longer the later I got. I could see Raish watching me, cat-like, as if just waiting for me to nod off. He was tricky, and I wondered if Mr. Castleberry had any coffee in his kitchen. I just had to make it a little longer, just a few more hours, and I was home free. I made it till 3:10 before I lost the fight. One moment I was running my 8-bit knight through my 100th dungeon, and the next I heard someone giggling from the bed. I looked up to find not the leering Raish, but Stephanie Morgan from my math class. She was joined by Tina Feller, Debbie Ross, and half of the cheerleading squad, whose names I was a little foggy on. They were in their underwear and seemed to be beckoning me to come join them. There were comments about long division and making a human pyramid, and as I got slowly to my feet, something seemed off. Where was Raish? He'd been there a minute ago. He might not have been present, but something in their voices as they called me to the bed reminded me of him. It was underneath their voice, something wicked and hidden, and I shook my head and snapped my eyes open not a moment too soon. I was standing at the edge of the circle again. I'd lost 20 minutes, and Raish was cursing like a sailor as he had a tantrum in the middle of the large bed. He was thrashing hard enough to jounce the frame, but not hard enough to disturb the salt. He looked at me with real scorn on his face, clearly contemplating all the terrible things he wanted to do to me.
You were so close! The booby trap always gets them!
I was wide awake now, but I knew it wouldn't last long unless I found something to focus on. 3 hours. I had 3 hours. Despite the knowledge, I smiled at the old imp. Can't trick me, Raish. No deceitful person will dwell in my house. No liar will stand in my presence. To my surprise, Raish sat back like I'd slapped him. I blinked. That was different. What? Not a big fan of scripture? Raish looked at me sardonically.
Obviously. I would prefer if you keep it to yourself in the future.
Message received, I thought. Maybe there was more to God than I had thought. So that was how I spent the last 3 hours of my night. I kept the old worn Bible on my lap, and whenever Raish would start trying to worm his way back in, I would begin to read from it. It put him off talking, right up until the sky began to lighten. Then he turned to me, my eyes barely staying open, and delivered one final bit of crypticness.
I don't have much time. When you think back on this night, I want you to remember that you could have had more than this old stick ever. He growled out. As the first rays of light came up over the windowsill, he twisted violently, so violently that I thought he had broken his neck. He twitched a few more times, screaming hoarsely until he finally settled back into bed. I sighed in relief as he twitched again, realizing it was over as I packed the cross and the Bible back into the box, with the gun and the earplugs and the spray bottle. The spray bottle went in last, and as I secured the lid, Mr. Castleberry sat up and stretched grandly. He blinked and looked at me, smiling as he realized I was still there. I had a feeling you would be less easy to scare off. As promised, you'll pass with an A now. Here, he said, and to my surprise, he fished $200 bills out of his nightstand. What's this for? I give anyone who works the sundown shift $200 when they're done. There's more where that came from, if you'd like to come back. The number of people who come back, believe it or not, is surprisingly low. I asked him how he could afford this, and he smiled, laughing warmly. I don't teach for the money. I teach because it's what I love to do. My father set me up before I was born, something I don't think Raish knows. Money doesn't mean the same thing to demons that it does to us, and I think he just sees it as a thing I have. I don't covet it, so he doesn't see it as a vice. $200, I thought, for 12 hours of basically nothing. I could sit 3 nights with Mr. Castleberry and make what I make at the fast food place in a week. I'd have to think about this pretty hard, but I was definitely tempted to come back. I knew what I was in for now, so it would be easier a second time. I knew Raish would probably have more tricks, but maybe I'd be ready, now that I was prepared. Before I left that day, I asked him what the demon had given him to get such control after dark. Mr. Castleberry thought about it for a moment and finally decided to share the secret with me. My mother was sick, very sick, and I was looking for a miracle to make her better. Raishael came to me and offered me a deal. He would possess my body after dark, control me from sun up to sun down, and in exchange, my mother would be spared from the disease that was killing her. I agreed on the condition that he couldn't do anything that would take away my ability to be free during the day. He agreed, but it was all for nothing. What do you mean? I asked. Your mother lived, right? For a while. He didn't lie. He cured her of the cancer that was eating away at her. The cancer, however, had damaged her kidneys. She lived another 8 months before she died of renal failure. Let that be a lesson to you, should you decide to come back. Demons always promise the moon, but they don't tell you that the cheese is rotten. I left that room $200 richer, and maybe a little wiser, too. Wiser or not, it wasn't the last time I sat with Mr. Castleberry, or Raishael. And when she came out of the bathroom, her entire class was gone. The 3rd grade class of 77 was never seen again. But they say sometimes you can still hear laughter in the woods outside. The door opened, and we all covered our eyes as Reggie grinned in at us. I knew you guys would be telling stories again. You should have waited. Becky sighed. Randall chuffed unhappily, and I tried to smile as I told Reggie to close the door before someone saw him. We were in the old equipment storage shed by the playfield, and if an adult saw us, they would make us get out. We like to tell scary stories. The scarier the locale, the better. The old equipment shed had been unanimously decided upon because A, it was home to a lot of creepy crawlies, and B, it didn't let in a lot of light. We had to keep finding new places to tell stories because the ones we had got old pretty quick.
You can tell stories in a place for only so long before it stops being scary, but also, sometimes it was because the teachers chased us out. The third reason was stepping in right now and grinning like a shot fox at us. Reggie was the weird kid of PS24, and he had earned that title honestly. It wasn't just because he was overweight to the point of being a blob, and it wasn't just because his hair was full of thick, gross-looking dandruff. It wasn't just because his dad was the janitor and seemed to love the job, or because he ate sauerkraut and onion sandwiches for lunch. The reason was that Reggie just emanated an aura of unsettledness. I got the feeling about him that I got about certain adults or dogs, the ones your parents tell you to stay away from. Reggie had a feeling of danger, of not rightness about him, and it made me uneasy. It didn't help that he had adopted us as his best friends this year. Becky, Randall, and I had been friends since kindergarten, but we had managed to avoid getting too close to Reggie. That had lasted until 4th grade, when we were in Miss Novak's class together. Reggie had decided that we were his best friends. He didn't have any regular friends, and he adopted us as his. This led to a year of smelling his sandwiches at lunch, having him follow us on our playground games, and listening to his wheezy, resting breath as he sat in our pod in class. We had hoped that we would be rid of him at the end of the year, but when our parents had signed us up for summer school care, a kind of after-school care during the summer, we had groaned as Reggie came in and saw us. He explained that the school had agreed to let him attend for free if his dad worked through the summer, and we all prayed that he would be in a different 5th grade class than us when next year rolled around.
"Well, since you've already started telling stories, I got a good one," Reggie said. "It's the tale of the skinned raccoon."
Reggie started to lay out his story about a skinned raccoon that had been seen one night while his dad worked late, and we all tried to pretend that it wasn't the most gruesome thing we had ever heard. The way he described the raccoon made me think that he had not only really seen it, but that he had probably skinned it himself. He said it had left little red footprints on the floor as it walked away, and his father had been angry when he found them. "We followed them all the way to the woods, but we never did find the raccoon." We all made an appreciatively scared noise, but I think we were all just hoping that he would let us move on. When Mrs. Simon pushed the door open a moment later, telling us this was off limits and we needed to leave, it was almost a relief. We left the shed, trying to kind of lose Reggie as we did, but we knew he'd find us again. It was impossible to hide from Reggie. He knew everywhere and everything about the school, all the hidden nooks and crannies. His dad had keys to any door in the school, and Reggie often borrowed some of them to get into places he shouldn't. His dad always covered for him, for some reason, so he never got in any trouble. It's weird, it was like his dad was scared of him sometimes, but he was a grown-up, and there was no reason that he should have been afraid of him. As we left the shed, running into the sunshine of the triple-digit day, Reggie said something that caught my interest.
"That's a shame. I was gonna tell you guys about how I saw the missing kids a few nights ago."
The missing kids. That was a big topic of discussion these days. Last year, 4 kids had gone missing from PS24. A 1st grader named Mary Edwards, a 3rd grader named George Tate, a kindergartner named Savannah Marcus, and a 5th grader named Robbie Fust. They had come to school and then just never left. The cameras at the school left a lot to be desired. That's what my dad said anyway, and they hadn't seen the kids leave school by any of the other exits either. My dad works for the police department, and he told me I needed to be extra safe until they found whoever was doing this. They suspected a teacher, but the question was, how would they get the kids out? If they were hiding the kids in the school somehow, then they would have been found by now, wouldn't they? They had searched the school a bunch. The disappearance had hung about the school like ghosts, and it sounded like the teachers were afraid that they might lose their job if it kept happening. I thought about what he had said until after lunch and decided I would just have to ask him. We were playing outside, the day a little cooler now that the sun was heading towards down, and Reggie was leaning against the fence and watching people as he often did. Reggie liked to just sit there and look at people, watching them as they went past, but he didn't make up stories about them or anything. He just watched them like the animals in the zoo watch fat kids. It was really weird. "So Reggie," I said, and Becky and Randall looked surprised since we never really talked to him and just accepted when he talked at us. "What do you mean that you were going to tell us about the missing kids?" Reggie turned his gaze away from a first grader who was chasing a ball with some effort, and his grin was downright predatory. "Oh yeah, I saw them the other night when Dad was working late." "Like you saw them, I said. "Like you know where they are." "Well, yeah," Reggie said. "They're under the school." I looked at Becky and Randall, and the two of them now looked as interested as I was. "Why haven't you told anyone?" Reggie shrugged. "No one asked." I could have smacked myself in the forehead. "Well, can you take us there?" Reggie was already grinning like a creepypasta monster, but I saw a glimmer pass over his eye, and I should have known to take it back. He wanted to show us. He wanted us to come with him, and I suddenly didn't want to go. But it didn't really matter if I wanted to or not. If there was a chance I could help my dad find those kids, I wanted to. Dad was worried about losing his job too if they didn't find somebody, and I didn't want that to happen. "Yeah, I'll show you. Come on." Reggie looked over at Mrs. Simon and Mrs. Gay to make sure they weren't paying attention, and the four of us headed towards the school. Reggie led us into a side door, through the third grade hallway, and to the middle of the school to an area called the Square. The Square had been a part of PS24 since it was built in the 70s. It's an area of grass with a couple of small trees growing there. How the roots don't mess up the school, I don't know, but it's a place that a lot of kids usually go to between classes. There's a utility building in the middle of it, and that was where Reggie took us. He pulled out a long key from his short pants and unlocked the door, ushering us into the little building before closing us into total darkness. Then he pulled the chain on a light hanging from the ceiling, and we were left looking around a small square room of tools and other implements. "There's no one here," Becky said, looking around before looking back at Reggie with a scared look. "Well, yeah," Reggie said, grabbing an edge of what turned out to be a carpet. "Otherwise, they would have found them by now." He pulled the carpet back and revealed a hatch in the floor. It was flush against the ground, with no wheel or handle to poke out, and if you didn't know it was there, you would never even see the rug. Reggie squeezed a pair of handles and pulled the hatch up to reveal a ladder that led down into the earth. Reggie started climbing down like he'd done it 1,000 times before, and when he saw that we weren't following, he asked us if we were coming. "They're down here. If you want to see them, then you'll have to come down," he said, making his way down again as if the matter was settled. I looked at Randall, but he just shook his head and went for the door. "No way, man. This is way too weird for me." He put a hand on the knob, but when he turned it, the door was locked. I went to look for the flip lock that would let us out, but the other side of the knob had a keyhole. I'd never seen anything like this, and I realized that Reggie had the only key to the door. We were locked in with him, for better or worse, and he would need to let us out again. I looked at the hole and figured it beat being stuck in here. At least, we might find another way out if we went down. We descended the ladder slowly, the darkness thick around us. I tried turning on the light on my watch so we could see a little, but it didn't provide much light. We spread out, trying to find a switch, and when the light suddenly came on, I jumped. We were in a big room, like a storage unit, and it stretched the length of the grassy area above us. The ceiling was metal, the walls were metal, the floor was concrete, and the place was full of boxes. They were stacked up to the ceiling in some places, and I wondered what this place had been before it was just here to store things. We grouped up, moving around as we checked the room, and I saw something speckled on the floor. It looked like someone had spilled juice, or maybe paint, and as we came around a big stack of boxes, I saw another door. This one wasn't locked, and as it came open, we saw that it led down a long hallway that went further into the underground. "What is this place, anyway?" Becky asked, sounding a little scared as we followed the tunnel. "I'm not sure," Randall said, "but my mom told me that she used to go here back in the early 80s, and people used to talk about there being bomb shelters or something under the school. She never saw them, but she said that was something the other kids told stories about." "You think that's what these are?" I asked, seeing a door coming up on our left. Randall shrugged. "Maybe, I guess. It would make sense for it to be in the very middle of the school." We tried the door, but it was locked tight. The next 3 were also locked, but the 5th door opened pretty easily and held what we were looking for. Well, not exactly what we were looking for, but we found the missing kids. The room had been some kind of workroom that had been turned into just another storage room. The boxes that the kids were lying on were drenched in blood. They were dead, thankfully. If they hadn't been, they would have been screaming. They were naked, their clothes lying in rags, and someone had been very busy. Their arms and legs had been removed, the bones broken cruelly. Their stomachs had been opened, their entrails hanging around them like snakes, and a few of them were missing eyes. The little girl, Mary, I thought, had her jaw pulled off and her tongue was missing. Becky started throwing up. Randall sounded like he wanted to scream, and when someone started laughing, I knew we'd stumbled into a trap. It was Reggie, his bulk blocking the door. He had a knife, the long kind you found in a kitchen, and he was grinning like a creep again. He just kept standing there, not trying to come after us, and it was clear that he realized, like we had, that we weren't going anywhere. "Looks like you found the lost kids. Guess it's time to add 3 more to my little collection." "Come on, Reggie," I said, trying to talk our way out of this. This isn't funny. You got us pretty good with these Halloween decorations, but enough's enough. You win. Just let us out so we can..." When he slashed me across my chest, slicing a long red line that split my t-shirt and my skin beneath, I hissed in pain and stumbled back. "There's no getting out now. You're staying here forever. I meant to get you all before school ended, but there was never a good opportunity. Now, we can be friends forever. All 8 of us." I was scared, but Randall had clearly gone past scared. He screamed like a cat that's been stomped on and ran at Reggie, shoving him as the big boy stabbed him in the shoulder. Even though he got him, Reggie was still off balance. He fell into some of the boxes, and we scattered. Randall had gone back the way we came, Becky running after him, but I knew there was no way out that way. I went left, running into the unknown, and when someone roared like an angry beast behind me, I charged heedlessly. I don't know how long I ran. I don't know how far I ran, but when I slammed into a ladder, it was hard enough to make my eyes blur. I shook myself as I started to climb. I couldn't let him catch me. If he caught me, I'd be dead. I climbed and climbed and climbed, and when I got to the top, I pushed at the hatch and almost screamed when it wouldn't move. I pushed and pushed, getting a little bit of give, but it always came back down again. I couldn't make it budge, not even a little bit, and as I shoved at it, I started hearing something down the tunnel behind me. It wasn't loud, not like someone running, but it was feet coming up the concrete. I screamed and shoved at the hatch, feeling it give but not open. I squinted as something fell on my face, dirt or something, and I had to brace my back against the wall so I could use both hands. I got brief flashes of light as I shoved, just the slight glimmer from the edges, and when I heard the laughter from the bottom of the ladder, I kept shoving, praying to God to help me. "Found you," Reggie sing-songed, putting his foot on the bottom rung of the ladder. "You might as well just come down. That hatch doesn't open. I don't know where it comes out at, but it's not gonna help you." He started climbing, and I felt like crying as I shoved at the hatch. My arms were hurting almost as badly as my chest, and I was afraid that he would get me before the latch could open. he would cut my legs and I'd fall down the ladder. Then he'd do whatever he wanted, probably drag me back to his little room and finish me off. I shoved and shoved, yelling for help as he got closer and closer. He was climbing slow, on purpose, really stretching it out, and his words were muffled by the knife that he held in his teeth.
Scream all you like. No one is coming to help.
But we both squinted when the hatch came slowly open, and I saw the faces of about 7 or 8 kids I recognized from the program. They helped me out, yelling for a teacher as Reggie retreated down the ladder. They had seen him, though. They knew he had been down there, and as the teachers came running, I was lying on the grass and breathing heavily. I was in a corner of the field, the back corner by the utility shed, and the kids had been playing kickball when they heard a loud shrieking noise that had come from that direction. It was the hinges on the door, long ago grown over with grass and covered with dirt. They came over and saw it opening and closing, and when they heard me yelling, they came to help pull me out. The group of them had managed to fling it open, and Mrs. Simons was running to see what they were talking about. I breathed a sigh of relief. I told them what had happened, told them how Becky and Randall were still down there, and Mrs. Simons sent someone to call the police, but wouldn't go down there herself. If what you're saying is true, then it would be dangerous for us to go down there until the police get here. They came pretty quick, my dad with them, and I told them the story again and begged them to save my friends before he hurt them. They went down the ladder, guns drawn and flashlights out, and my dad and another officer told me to take them to the shed that Reggie had brought us down from. I took him there, but the door was standing open, and I knew that Reggie had fled. Dad went down the ladder, and to my relief came up with Becky and Randall. They were scared, but unharmed. They told us how Reggie had come running for the front door and climbed up while they hid behind some boxes. They said he hadn't even noticed them as they ran, and he seemed pretty scared. They took the bodies out in bags, and the whole place was covered in tape. They got Reggie's dad, too, and he told them how he had known there was something off about his son, but he hadn't known what it was. I know it's not right to be afraid of your kid, but I was really afraid that he would kill me one night. The police decided he hadn't had anything to do with it, though I heard the school fired him for knowingly letting Reggie take his keys and get into restricted areas. As for Reggie, no one knows what happened to him. Wherever he ran to, he was never seen again. Now the ghost stories around school are about Reggie and how he's just waiting for his next chance to kill more kids. If they'd been down there in those tunnels that day, if they'd had stood face to face with the psycho while he contemplated killing us, they might not be so quick to tell stories about him.
Attention, teachers and pupils. Recess is canceled today due to crows. That is all.
There was a collective awe from the students, but that wasn't what had caught my attention. Had the principal just said crows? Like the birds? I asked myself as I told my third graders we would play Heads Up 7-Up. As they got set up to play, I picked up the phone and called a friend of mine in the other class. Kayla had been helping me integrate into the flow of Jefferson Moore Elementary since I'd arrived here at the start of last year, and I could hear the smile on her face as she answered the phone. "Mrs. Swearington's class." "Crows?" I asked, without preamble. "Did I hear that right?" "You did. The school has a code for crows, and you should definitely follow it." I was quiet for a moment, trying to find a good response to that, until she said my name like she might have lost me. "I mean, are crows different in Ohio? 'Cause we had crows in Maine, too, but we didn't close down the playground for them." She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sound of a very heated argument going on over what I assumed was her own game of Heads Up 7-Up. Great minds think alike, it seems. Crows here are a little different. I can't really talk about it right now. Meet me after school for drinks and I'll fill you in. Don't worry though, crow days only usually last a couple of days. A couple of days, I said in disbelief, but that's when someone started crying and Kayla said she had to go. She hung up and I was left with more questions than answers. Wasn't that much of an inconvenience, I suppose. My kids, despite being 8 and 9, were pretty well behaved. I had very few fights, very little beyond the usual drama that surrounded little kids, and most of them were good friends who helped each other. My own game of heads-up 7-up was full of more laughter than arguments. And as recess ended, we started math and worked our way towards lunch. Good kids or not, it was still going to be a long day without recess. Even the well-behaved kids get stir-crazy when they can't blow off some steam on the playground. Luckily, we had gym today, so they could get their zoomies out in the fully enclosed gym building instead. We walked across the school, me leading the line as we headed for the gymnasium, and I couldn't help but glance at the playground as we walked past. Even as an adult, I thought the new playground looked pretty cool. They had replaced all the old metal equipment with colorful plastic, and it made me wish that I could take my tie and my sensible shoes off and just go play with them for a while. There were 5 huge colorful structures, teeter-totters, slides, and plenty of foursquare courts, some of those spring animals, a big sandbox and a basketball court, and a lot of shady places to sit and visit with your friends. It was an amazingly inviting place, but today it looked like something out of a Stephen King novel. The crows had taken over every inch of the playground, and they lay thick upon the land. They watched us as we passed, looking affronted to see people so close. I understood now. It was a little intimidating to see so many crows assembled. They called a group of crows a murder, and the name made sense now. They looked capable of anything as they sat there glaring at us. They looked capable of hurting even me in such numbers, and I turned my back on them with a real effort. They were still there when the bell rang to release the students for the day, and I noticed that no one went anywhere near the playground as they headed for home or the bus. Kayla shot me a text as I walked to my car and let me know that she'd have to go home with stomach problems, but that she would meet me very soon to let me know the story behind the crows. Just don't do anything dumb in the meantime. I don't want you getting in over your head. I rolled my eyes at her text, but decided I would toe the line until I had more information. I had to admit that something about that group of crows had spooked me, and I suddenly didn't like the idea of just going out there and scaring them off. I don't know how they would react, and I wasn't in a big hurry to find out. I had joked that we had crows where I was from, but I didn't think I'd ever seen crows like this. I must have been thinking about them as I lay down to sleep, because I dreamed about them that night. I was walking into the playground, the crows sitting around me and staring in disapproval. Everything beyond the playground was like mist. I was standing in a fog bank, and the deeper I went into the playground, the more crows there seemed to be. In the center of the playground was a merry-go-round, the old metal one that often injured the children who went to play on it. Standing in the center was a man, slowly rotating with the motion of the thing. He had his back to me, and I saw that he wore a coal-black suit with a high, dark mantle. His top hat was lined with feathers and shining trinkets. His boots were black and thick. He was rotating slowly, the old engine of destruction squealing as it turned ever so slowly. The crows were looking at him, their beady eyes drawn to him, and as he spun, I became afraid. I didn't think I wanted this man to look at me. I thought that if he looked at me, something terrible might happen, but I was powerless to look away. He just spun like a ballerina in a music box, and as he came around, I saw one glittering eye before I woke up in a cold sweat. There was another warning about the crows during the morning announcements, but it was hardly needed. We had all seen them as they perched on the playground equipment when we came to school that day. I was working the pickup line that morning, and the reaction of the kids weren't what drew my attention. The children were disappointed, but understanding. No, it was the reaction of the adults that caught my eye. There were some transplants, like me, who looked at it like an oddity, but it was the locals that really caught my eye. They looked at the playground like a source of childhood trauma, and many of them made sure to tell their kids not to go to the playground under any circumstances. "Keep a close eye on her," one mother said as her kindergartner walked inside, her pink coat making her stand out amongst the sea of children. "I'd hoped they wouldn't come back this year. Damn him," she whispered, and then looked at me like she had said too much before driving off in a controlled hurry. We settled in for the day's lesson, but you could tell that the mood was muted. They didn't have gym to look forward to today. The extracurricular was music, and they knew that there would be no real outside activity today. I hated it for them, and when I called Kayla at about 10:30, my text going unseen, I was in for another surprise. The woman who answered said that Miss Swearington was out today, and might be for the rest of the week. Poor dear, she caught that bug that's going around. I hope she didn't leave it behind when she was here yesterday. I hear it's nasty. I didn't even have lunch with my friend to look forward to, it seemed, and I settled in for a long day. As the class played hide-and-seek during indoor recess, I noticed that one of the students was still at her desk. Lisa was coloring up a storm, really putting swirls on her page, and I came up to check what she was drawing. She looked absolutely focused on what she was doing, showing no interest in the other students or their games. It was odd to see that kind of focus in a kid her age, and she jumped a little when I came up behind her and tapped her on the shoulder. "Whatcha?" I started, but when I looked at the page, it took my breath away. She had drawn the playground for my dream perfectly, complete with the man in the dark cloak and the top hat. He was standing on the merry-go-round, arms extended to the sky, and the crows were flying all around him. The picture was way too detailed for someone her age, much too good for someone not even in middle school, and when she looked back at me, she asked if I had seen him. "Who?" I asked, though I knew what she meant. "The crow count," she said, matter-of-factly, as if it was something that everyone knew. "I haven't," I lied, picking up the picture and getting a better look. "Who is he?" "Mommy says not to talk about him," Lisa said, looking guilty as she realized she shouldn't be drawing him either. "I won't tell," I said as I put the page back on her desk. "Is he a friend of yours?" "No," Lisa said, and she sounded afraid of the idea that someone might think he was friends with her. "The crow count isn't anyone's friend. He brings the crows here. At least, that's what Mommy told me. She said I must never go into big groups of crows, or the crow count will take me away with the murder." Hearing someone so young say these things made me cold all over again, but I just patted her arm and said that was very interesting. It was the most normal thing in the world to her, apparently, and I didn't want to draw attention to the fact that this was my first time hearing about it. I left her to her coloring, telling my students they had about 5 minutes left on indoor recess before we had to go back to our desks. I googled crow count and crows in Ohio, but I didn't get much. Crows in Ohio brought up some memes, because of course it did, but the crow count brought up only a single entry. It was an old Germanic legend about a ruler of crows who sometimes took children to feed his flock or young girls to be his bride. Neither were ever seen again, but it was an excuse for telling children to avoid large groups of crows, something associated with battlefields and death. The depiction, something taken from an old storybook, was very familiar. A courtly fellow in a tall hat with feathers and a dark cloak. I clicked off of it, feeling my stomach tie itself in a knot, and began geography. I was still thinking about it at the end of the day as the bell rang and everyone headed for home. The playground was still full of crows, and it was hard not to imagine that I could see someone on the playground amongst them. Could that be the hatted gentleman? The crow count? I didn't dare look too long, but I was beginning to get a little tired of this. 2 days with no outdoor recess was beginning to take a toll on the students. I didn't know what we'd do if this went on much longer, but it appeared we'd never find out. After a night spent dreaming about crows and the man in the tall hat, I arrived at school to find a group of adults standing around the outskirts of the playground. The crows were giving them an unhappy look, looking like bouncers preparing to kick them out, and I approached the group to see what was going on. The teachers looked at me guiltily, not seeming to be sure what to say, until Mr. Simonson, the 5th grade English teacher, stepped up and said that one of his students had gone in there. Samantha Parks was walking across the track, heading for her first class, when she stopped and looked at the playground. It was like something had entranced her, and she walked slowly away from the track and headed into the playground. "Has anyone gone in after her?" I asked, afraid the birds might hurt her. The others shook their heads, and I felt a rage building in me as I dropped my bag and walked towards the playground. Crows or no crows, I was not going to let a student get injured without trying to help them. Mr. Simonson caught my arm as I tried to go in. He won't like it if you disturb him," he whispered, looking ashamed that he had said it. "Who?" I asked, squaring my shoulders and looking at him darkly. "The crow count?" He looked surprised that I knew the name, but when he let me go, I walked straight onto the playground and away from the pack of cowards. The crows watched me, hostility in their beady eyes, but they made no move to attack me as I walked amongst them. It was exactly like my dream. The crows covered everything, their numbers having risen in 3 days since they had been here. Their murder was huge, the equipment looking like a giant crow as they sat on every empty surface. It was a mass of wings and feathers and beady black eyes, and I walked within that heaving black sea of avians. I came to the center far too soon. He was standing on a merry-go-round, the metal battered and the paint faded and chipped. It looked as if it had been moved through time, and he stood in the middle of it as it turned ever so slowly. The crows guarded him, leaning closer as if making ready to charge me if I tried to attack him, and he seemed utterly at ease. He was dressed in the same black hat with feathers around the brim, the same black coat, dark as a raven's wing, and the same leather boots that looked like they had walked across the ages to be here. He looked like he could have known Vlad Tepes, like he could have watched an original Shakespeare play, could have wielded a knife as it slew Caesar. He was ageless, an engine of destruction as much as the one he stood upon, and as he turned, I saw the girl kneeling on the hot top. She was tall for 10, looking like a woman more than a child, and when I took a step towards her, the man spoke.
"Do not touch what belongs to the crows."
I stopped, despite myself, and as I looked up, I finally got a look at him. His face was young, his hair a perfect salt and pepper, and his features were sharp and angular. He looked like a painting in a museum, a man out of time, and as he came fully around, he looked like nothing so much as a demon in human form. His eyes, however, were what drew me the most. They sparkled, the cornea like the facets of a gem. No wonder the crows followed him. His eyes were something they would desire above all else, and I wondered if they would take them from him when his life finally came to an end. Somehow, despite being captivated by this strange man, I found the courage to speak. She does not belong to you. She is of this school and under its protection, under my protection." The man sneered at me.
"You would dare tell me what treasures I may take? This is my domain, and I take what I want."
"Not today," I said, and the girl shook off whatever spell she had been under and began to hyperventilate. Where am I?" she asked, and I tried my best to calm her down. That seemed to be what the crows were waiting for. They flew at us suddenly, buffeting the two of us with their wings and raking at us with their claws. Crows may not seem very formidable, but they're bigger than you think, and there were so many of them that it was all I could do to pick her up and run in a direction. As long as it was away from the crow count, I didn't give a damn where I went. I pushed the girl in front of me, leading her through the throng of crows and getting pretty cut up in the process. I heard her scream as I covered her with my body, putting a hand over my face as I tried to save my eyes. We were running blind, bumping into things and rebounding back before we chose a different way. I felt like we would never make it out, that the crows would bury us under their mass and just carry us away. I didn't think I'd ever see my class, my students, or anything ever again. And that was when I stumbled out of the cloud and out of the playground. I lay on the ground, covering myself, but the crows were gone. I was breathing heavily, reaching for the girl to reassure her, but she wasn't there. I looked around trying to find her, but she was just gone. Where was she? Had she escaped? What had... But that was when I heard a massive push of wings and the raised voice of the murder. As I looked up, they all took flight at once, ascending into the sky in a great wave of black wings. In the middle of the cloud, held between the claws of many, many crows, were a pair of people that were soon lost amongst the cloud. One in a tall hat and cloak, and another in the uniform our students wore. All I could do was watch them go, the tears coming as the murder took flight and left our playground behind. The other teachers came up then, helping me to my feet as they took me to the office. The principal was expecting me, and she told me to take a seat as the nurse came in to treat the multiple cuts and abrasions I had. "I'm sorry you had to learn about this way. It's why we don't often hire outsiders. They don't understand, and it gets many of them killed, or worse." I had 1,000 questions, but I was in shock, and I couldn't vocalize any of them. The crow count is part of the town's history. He's something that has always existed, and always will. He comes, he takes, he leaves. In the years he does not take, we celebrate. In the years when he does, we mourn. That's why we have the crow warnings, why we teach our kids to be on their guard, and why the parents are so fearful. We know he will take if we give him the chance. There's nothing we can do about it. The crow count is old and clever, and nothing will stop him. Best to accept it. He never takes more than we can afford. I wondered if the parents I saw consoling each other as I went to leave would agree that the price had been something they could afford. I'm sitting in my apartment now, and I'm 3 sheets to the wind. I don't know if I can keep teaching here, knowing that the crow count will be back again. But I don't know what else I would do. I love my job, and I love the kids, and if I can keep them safe, then don't I owe that to them? Also, I want to know more about this thing. I want to know what it is, and how it came to be here. Also, I want to know why it takes them, and what it does with them when it has them. Above all else, I want to know how we can stop it from happening, and stop the crows from stealing what is most precious to us. I heard Susan was having a party this weekend while her parents were out of town. Oh yeah? Any of us invited? Nope. Just the popular kids, the jocks, few of the popular academics. No one from our bunch. Sounds like a special guest might be needed then. We were all sitting in the back of Mrs. Smith's history class, so the nod was almost uniform. Around us, people were talking about Susan's party. Why shouldn't they be? Susan Masterson was one of the most popular girls in school, after all. But They were all talking about the mysterious events that had surrounded the last 4 parties hosted by popular kids. The figure that kept infiltrating these parties was part of that mystery. Nobody knew who they were. Nobody saw them commit their heinous deeds, but the results were always the same. Sometimes it was on the living room floor. Sometimes it was in the kitchen on the snack table. Sometimes it was in the top of the toilet in her parents' bathroom, a place that no one was supposed to have been. No matter where it was, someone always found poop at the party. "Do you still have any of those candles left?" I asked Tina, running a hand over my gelled-up hair to make sure the spikes hadn't drooped. "Yeah, found a place in the barrio that sells them, but they're becoming hard to track down. I could only get about a dozen of them." "A dozen is more than enough," Cooper said. "With a dozen, we can hit 6 more parties at least." "Pretty soon," Mark said, "they'll learn not to snub us. Pretty soon, they'll learn that we hold the fate of their precious parties." The bell rang then, and we rose like a flock of ravens and made our way out of class. The beautiful people scoffed at us as we walked up the hall, saying things like, "There goes the coven," and "Hot Topic must be having a going out of business sale." But they would learn better soon. Before long, they would learn that we were the lords of this school, because we controlled that which made them shiver. I've never been what you'd call popular. I've probably been more of what you'd call a nerd since about the 2nd grade. Don't get me wrong, I was a nerd before that, but that was about the time that my peers started to notice. They commented on my thick glasses, my love of comic books, and the fact that I got our class a pizza party every year off just the books that I read. Suddenly, it wasn't so cool to be seen with the nerd. I found my circle of friends shrinking from grade to grade, and it wasn't until I got to high school that I found a regular group of people to hang out with. Incidentally, that was the year I discovered that I liked dressing goth. My colorful wardrobe became a lot darker, and I started 9th grade with a new outlook on life. My black boots, band t-shirts, and ripped black jeans had made me stand out, but not in the way I had hoped. I went from being a nerd to a freak, but I discovered that the transformation wasn't all bad. Suddenly, I had people interested in getting to know me, and that was how I met Mark, Tina, and Cooper. I was a sophomore now, and despite some things having changed, some things had stayed the same. We all acted like we didn't care that the popular kids snubbed us and didn't invite the nerds or the freaks to their parties, but it still didn't feel very good to be ostracized. We were never invited to sit with them at lunch, never asked to go to football games or events, never invited to Spirit Week or homecoming, and the more we thought about it, the more that felt wrong. That was when Tina had come up with something special. Tina was a witch, not the fake wands and butterbeer kind of witch, but the kind with real magic. She had inherited her aunt's grimoire, a real book of shadows that she'd used when she was younger, and Tina had been doing some hexes and curses on people that she didn't like. She'd given Marcy Graves that really bad rash before homecoming, no matter how much she wanted to say it was because she was allergic to the carnation that Gavin had got her. She had caused Travis Brown to trip in that hole and lose the big game that would have taken us to state, too. People would claim that it was just a coincidence, but we all knew better. So, when she came to us and told us she had found something that would really put a damper on their parties, we had been stoked. "Susan's party is tomorrow," Tina said, checking her grimoire as we walked to art class. "So, if we do the ritual tomorrow night, we can totally ruin her party." Some of the popular girls, Susan among them, looked up as we passed, but we were talking too low for them to hear us. She mouthed the words freaks, but I ignored her. She'd see freaks tomorrow night when her little party got pooped on. We spent art class discussing our own gathering for tomorrow. After we discovered the being in Tina's book, we never called what we did parties anymore. They were gatherings now. It sounded more occult. We weren't some dumb airheads getting together for beer and hookups. We were a coven, coming together to make some magic. This was bigger than anything these guys could think of. "Cooper, you bring the offering and the snacks," Tina said. Cooper made a face. "Can I bring the drinks instead? Bringing food along with the offering just seems kind of gross." Tina thought about it before nodding. "Yeah, good idea. And be sure to wash your hands after you get the offering." Cooper nodded. "Good, because I still have Bacardi from last time." "Mark, you bring the snacks then," Tina said. "And don't forget to bring the fennel weed. We need it for the ritual." Mark nodded. "Mr. Dakar said that I could bring the leftover chicken at the end of my shift, so I hope that's okay." That was fine with us. The chicken Mark brought was always a great end to the ritual. "Cool, that leaves the ipecac syrup and the X-lax from you, my dear," she said, smiling at me as my face turned a little red under my light foundation. Tina and I had been an item for a couple of weeks, and I still wasn't quite used to it. I'd never had a girlfriend before then, and the giddy feeling inside me was at odds with my goth exterior. Tina was cute, and she was the de facto leader of our little coven. It was kind of cool to be dating a real witch. "So, we all meet at my house tomorrow before 10. Agreed?" We all agreed, and the pact was sealed. The next night, Friday, I arrived at 6, so Tina and I could hang out before the others got there. Her parents were out of town again, which was cool because she never had to make excuses for where she was going. My parents thought I was spending the night at Mark's. Cooper's parents thought he was spending the night at Mark's, and Mark's mom was working a third shift, so she wasn't going to be home to answer any questions if they called to check in. It was a perfect storm, and we were prepared to be at the center of it. Tina was already setting up the circle and making preparations, but she broke off when I came in with my part of the ritual. We were both a little out of breath when Cooper arrived an hour later, and after hurriedly getting ourselves back in order, he came in with 2 12-packs. "Swipe these from my uncle. He's already drunk, so he'll never miss them. I think he just buys them for the 20-year-olds he's trying to bang anyway." "As long as you brought the other thing, too," Tina said, "unless you mean to make it here." Cooper rolled his eyes and handed over a grungy Tupperware with a severe-looking lid on it. "I got it right here, don't worry." He helped us with the final prep work, and we were all on our 1000th game of Mario Kart by the time Mark got there at 9. He smelled like grease and chicken and immediately went to change out of his work clothes. I didn't know about everyone else, but I secretly loved that smell. Mark was self-conscious about smelling like fried chicken, but I liked it. If I thought it was a smell I wouldn't become blind to after a few weeks, I'd probably ask him to get me a job at Colonel Register's Chicken Chateau, too. Cooper tried to reach in for some of the chicken, but Tina smacked his hand. "Ritual first, then food." Cooper gave her a dark look, but nodded as we headed upstairs. It was time to ruin another Amber Zombie and Fitch party. When Tina had showed us the summons for something called the Party Pooper, we had all been a little confused. "The Party Pooper?" Cooper had asked, pointing to the picture of the little man with the long beard and the evil glint in his eyes. "The Party Pooper," Tina confirmed. "He's a spirit of revenge for the downtrodden. He comes to those who have been overlooked or mistreated and brings revenge in their name by," she looked at what was written there, "leaving signs of the summoner's displeasure where it can be found." "Neat," said Cooper. "So how do we summon him?" Turns out the spell was pretty easy. We would need a clay vessel, potions or tinctures to bring about illness from the well, herbs to cover the smell of waste, and the medium by which revenge could be achieved. Once the ingredients were assembled, we would light the candles and perform the chant to summon the Party Pooper to do our bidding. That first time, it had been a kegger at David Frick's house, and we had been particularly salty about it. David had invited Mark, the two of them having science together, and when Mark had seemed thrilled to be invited, David had laughed. "Yeah, right, chicken fry, like I need you smelling up my party." Everyone had laughed, and it had been decided that David would be our first victim. As we stood around the earthen bowl, Tina wrinkled her nose as she bent down to light the candles. "God, Cooper, do you eat anything besides Taco Bell?" Cooper shrugged, grinning from ear to ear. "What can I say? It was some of my best work." The candles came lit with a dark, greasy light. The ingredients were mixed in the bowl, and then the offering was laid atop it. The spell hadn't been specific in the kind of filth it required, but given the name of the entity, Tina thought it best to make sure it was fresh and ripe. That didn't exactly mean she wanted to smell Cooper's poop, but it seemed worth the discomfort. "Link hands," she said, "and begin the chant." We linked hands, Mark's as clammy as Tina's were sweaty, and we began to chant. "Every party needs a pooper. That's why we have summoned you. Party pooper. Party pooper." The circle puffed suddenly, the smell like something from an outhouse. The greasy light of the candles showed us the now familiar little man, his beard long and his body short. He was bald, with a head covered in liver spots, and his mean little eyes were the color of old dog turds. His bare feet were black, like a corpse's, and his toes looked rotted and disgusting. He wore no shirt, only long brown trousers that left his ankles bare, and he took us in with weary good cheer. "Ah, if it isn't my favorite little witches! Who has wronged you tonight, children?" We were all quiet, knowing it had been Tina to whom he spoke. The spell had been pretty clear that a crime had to be stated for this to work. The person being harassed by the party pooper had to have wronged one of the summoners in some way for the revenge to be extracted, so we had to find a reason for the summoning. The reason for David had come from Mark, and it had been humiliation. After David had come Frank Gold, and that one had been from Cooper. Frank had cheated him, refusing to pay for an essay he had written, and then having him beaten up when he told him that he would tell Mrs. Bess about it. Cooper had cited damages to his person and debt. The third time had been mine, and it was Margaret Wheeler. Margaret and I had known each other since elementary school, and she was not very popular. She and I had been friends, but when I'd asked her to the Sadie Hawkins dance in 8th grade, she had laughed at me and told me that there was no way she'd be seen with a dork like me. That had helped her get in with the other girls in our grade, and it only served to alienate me further. I had told the party pooper that her crime was disloyalty, and he had accepted that. Now, it was Susan's turn, and we all knew that Tina had the biggest grudge against her for something that had happened in elementary school. "Susan Masterson," Tina intoned. "And how has this Susan Masterson wronged thee?" "She was a false friend who invited me to her house so she could humiliate me." The party pooper thought about this, but didn't seem to like the taste. "I think not," he finally said. There was a palpable silence in the room. "No, has it ever occurred to you that this Susan Masterson may have done you a favor? Were it not for her, you may very well be somewhere else tonight, instead of surrounded by loyal friends." Tina was silent for a moment. This was clearly not going as planned. "No, I think it is jealousy that drives your summons tonight. You are jealous of this girl, and you wish to ruin her party because of it." He floated a little higher over the circle, and I didn't like the way he glowered down at us. "What's more, you have ceased to be downtrodden and mistreated, and I am to blame for this. I have empowered you, made you dependent, and I am sorry for this. Do not summon me again, children, not until you have a true reason for doing such." With that, he disappeared in a puff of foul wind, and we were left standing in stunned silence. It hadn't worked. The party pooper had refused to help us. "Oh well," Cooper said, sounding a little downtrodden. "I guess we didn't have as good a claim as we thought. Well, let's go eat that chicken," he said, turning to go. "That sucks," Mark said. "Next time we'll need something a little fresher, I guess." They were walking out the room, but as I made to follow them, I noticed that Tina hadn't moved. She was staring at the spot where the party pooper had been, tears welling in her eyes, and as I put a hand on her shoulder, she exhaled a loud, agitated breath. I tried to lead her out of the room, but she wouldn't budge, and I started to get worried. T, it's okay. We'll try again some other time. Those assholes are bound to mess up eventually, and then we can get them. It's just a matter of time. Tina was crying for real now, her mascara running as the tears fell in heavy black drops. It's not fair. It's not fair. She let me fall asleep and put my hand in water. She took it away after I wet myself, and I saw the water ring, though. I felt how wet my fingers were, and when she laughed and told the other girls I wet myself, I knew she had done it on purpose. She ruined it. She ruined my chance of being popular. It's not fair. How is my grievance any less viable than you guys? Come on, hun, I said. Let's go get drunk and eat some chicken. You'll feel a lot better. I tried to lead her towards the door, but as we came even, she shoved me into the hall and slammed it in my face. Mark and Cooper turned as they heard the door slam, and we all came back and banged on it as we tried to get an answer. Tina, what are you doing? Don't do anything stupid. From under the door, I could see the light of candles being lit, and just under the sound of Mark and Cooper banging, I heard a very familiar chant. Every party needs a pooper. That's why I have summoned you, party pooper, party pooper. Then the candle lights were eclipsed as a brighter light lit the room. We all stepped away from the door as an otherworldly voice thundered through the house. The party pooper had always been a jovial little creature when we had summoned him, but this time he sounded anything but friendly. The party pooper sounded pissed. You dare to summon me, mortal? You believe you are owed my power? You believe you are entitled to my aid? See now why they call me the party pooper. There was a sound somewhere between a jello mold hitting the ground and a truckload of dirt being unloaded, and something began to ooze beneath the door. When it popped open, creaking wide with a horror movie slowness, I saw that every surface in Tina's room had been covered in a brown sludge. It covered the ceiling, the walls, the bed, and everything in between. Tina lay in the middle of the room, her body covered in the stuff, and as I approached her, the smell hit me all at once. It was like an open sewer drain, the scent of raw sewage like a palpable blow, and I barely managed to power through it to get to Tina's side. Tina, are you okay? She said nothing, but when she opened her mouth, a bucket of that foul-smelling sewage came pouring out. She coughed, and more came up. She spent nearly 10 minutes vomiting up the stuff, and when she finally stopped, I got her to her feet and helped her out of the room. Start the shower. We need to get the stuff off of her. I scrubbed her, taking her sodden clothes off and cleaning the worst of it off her. She was covered in it. It was caked in her ears and her nose, in other places, and it seemed the party pooper had wasted nothing in the pursuit of justice. She still wouldn't speak after that, and I wanted to call an ambulance. She could be really sick, I told them, when Cooper said we shouldn't. That stuff was inside her. If we call the hospital, our parents are going to know we lied. In the end, it was a chance I was willing to take. I stayed, Mark and Cooper leaving so they didn't get in trouble. I told the paramedics that she had called me, saying she felt like she was dying, and I came to check on her. They loaded her up and called her parents, but I was told it would be better if I went back home and waited for updates. Tina was never the same after that. Her mother thanked me for helping her when I came to see her, but told me Tina wouldn't even know I was there. She's catatonic. They don't know why, but she's completely lost control of her bowels. She vomits for no reason. She has, I don't know what, in her stomach, but they say it's like she fell into a septic tank. She's breathed it into her lungs. It's behind her eyelids. She has infections in her ears and nose because of it, and We don't know what's wrong with her. That was 6 months ago. They put Tina into an institution for someone to take care of her 24/7, but she still hasn't said a word. She's getting better physically, but something is broken inside her. I still visit, hoping to see some change, but it's like talking to a corpse. I still hang out with Mark and Cooper, but I know they feel guilty for not going to see her. In the end, Tina tried to force her revenge with a creature that she didn't understand, and paid the price. So if you think you might have a grievance worthy of the party pooper, do yourself a favor and just let it go. Nothing is worth incurring the wrath of that thing, and you might find yourself in deep shit for your trouble. Did anyone else become a participant in the social experiment known as Flat Stanley? I went to elementary school in the mid-90s, 95 to 2001, and I was in the 3rd grade when our teacher announced that we would be taking part in the Flat Stanley project. For those of you unfamiliar with the concept, Flat Stanley was a series of books about a flat kid who goes on all kinds of weird adventures to famous places. New York, the Grand Canyon, France, Australia. This guy went everywhere and was like a flat version of Curious George. We started reading them in class, making them part of our English hour, and one day, Mrs. Gazel told us that we were going to have a contest. Today's English lesson is to create your own Flat Stanley. It can look however you want, but the winner of the contest will get 3 prizes from the prize basket, and will be the class's Flat Stanley that we send into the world to participate in the Flat Stanley project. We were all excited. This was a chance to see our work in pictures that would come back, not to mention get some cool stuff out of the prize basket. We all drew out our own concepts for Flat Stanley and set to work coloring and designing him. My Flat Stanley was a spy, wearing a big trench coat and a wide hat and carrying binoculars. He wore his regular clothes under it, and he just looked so goofy that I thought I had a real chance of winning. My friend Todd laughed when he glanced over at it, telling me it was cool. His Flat Stanley was a football player for the Georgia Bulldogs, his favorite team, and I thought his Flat Stanley looked cool too. So when the class voted on the displayed Stanleys, I figured Kaylee's Flat Stanley would win. It had a sparkly tiara and a ball gown she had made with felt. That was the one that I voted for, at least, since you couldn't vote for your own, and if not hers, I figured Matt's would win. His Flat Stanley was a truck driver, complete with a net hat and a sleeveless t-shirt, and he'd put a lot of work into it. I knew some kids might find mine funny, but I never figured I stood a chance. I hadn't used any special materials or done anything really innovative, and I figured I'd hang him in my room when I got home. So when Miss Gazel announced that my Flat Stanley had won, I was shocked. I went home that night with a new bounce ball, a pocket-sized Stretch Armstrong, and an eraser shaped like a Pikachu. I also went home to tell my mom that I had won the contest and that my Flat Stanley would be going out to other schools and other places, so we could get pictures back and see all the cool places that he had been. She said that sounded really neat, and we brainstormed where he might end up. Paris, Disneyland, the moon. We both laughed at that one, and maybe even at an Atlanta Braves baseball game. We had a good afternoon thinking about where he might end up, and when Dad got home, he joined us in our daydream. I went to bed that night, thinking about all the cool places Stanley might go, and what we might see when he came back. It started out pretty normal. Mrs. Gazel sent the package out to a school the next town over, and they sent us back pictures a week later. Stanley had been to a volleyball game, an art museum, and finally to a play put on by the class. They sent him up the road to the next school, where Stanley went on a hike, went to the zoo, and then went to a baseball game. It wasn't the Atlanta Braves, but it was a t-ball game, and that was still pretty neat. This went on for a couple of months, Flat Stanley traveling to Texas, New Mexico, California, Idaho, and Kansas. We hung the pictures up, sent out thank you cards, and talked about the places that Flat Stanley had gone. It was a good time, and we used it for our geography class to help us learn the states. It seemed that Flat Stanley was in all our lessons that year. Math, if Flat Stanley travels from Burbank, California to El Paso, Texas, how far has he traveled? Geography, if Flat Stanley is at the Alamo, then where is he? and of course, English, where we read the books and the letters that we got back out loud. It was approaching April when we came to class to find that Miss Gazel wasn't there. We were all pretty bummed because Wednesdays were usually when we got our Flat Stanley letters, and the sub told us that Miss Gazel would talk to us about it when she got back. There was no Flat Stanley that day, and when Miss Gazel came back the following week, we moved on to something else. All the Flat Stanley stuff had disappeared from the class, and its absence was as noticeable as our missing teacher had been. She never told us what had happened, and it was a mystery talked about in hushed tones well into the 4th grade. It would probably still be a mystery if I hadn't decided a decade later to pursue teaching. I'm in my 2nd year of college now, and I've progressed into student teaching. I decided that I wanted to try my hand at being an elementary school teacher, something like 4th or 5th grade, and when they gave me the name of my mentor, I realized I knew her. It was Miss Gazel, my old 3rd grade teacher. She taught 5th grade now, her retirement coming up on the horizon, and she smiled when she realized who I was, giving me a big hug. "Welcome back. I'm glad to see you decided to take up teaching." Her classroom was in the same room her 3rd grade class had been in, and the kids reminded me a lot of me and my friends when we were her students. They were a good group. They were hungry to learn, and they liked her a lot. Miss Gazel was the kind of teacher that kept kids' attention effortlessly, and I hoped it was a skill that I could learn from her. The kiddos in her class took to me pretty quickly, and soon I was teaching classes while Miss Gazel just sat back and observed. Something about being in her class again made me remember my days as a 3rd grader at this school, and that made me think about Flat Stanley. There was nothing like that in her 5th grade class. The kids would have probably thought it was babyish, but it did rekindle some of the mystery I had felt from a decade before. I tried to find a good time to bring it up, but nothing seemed to present itself. Until Friday, on my 2nd week. I was packing up to leave when Miss Gazel offered to take me out for some drinks. I was a little surprised, and she must have noticed because she laughed airily at my look of chagrin. "What, you didn't know teachers drank?" she said, her coat over one arm. I decided to join her and found a small group of other teachers waiting for us when we arrived. Some of them I knew, some of them I didn't, but it turned out that this was a regular thing for them. They drank and talked about their week, complained about some students who were especially difficult, and generally blew off steam. Mrs. Gazel and I sat in the corner, nodding and listening to them, and she smiled at me over the lip of her 4th glass of wine sometime near 11. "I've been sending glowing reviews to your professor," she confided. "You're one of the better student teachers I've ever worked with. I think you're probably a shoo-in to be hired at the end of your training period, and I'll recommend you to the principal myself, if he doesn't extend you a position." I thanked her, sipping my 2nd beer as I took it all in. "Hey, can I ask you something?" I said suddenly. "Neither of us are drunk enough for you to offer me a ride home yet, big fella," she said, snorting into her glass. No, nothing like that. Something always bugged me from my time in your class, and I was wondering if you remember the Flat Stanley project we did." Some of the color fled from her cheeks, and I could swear that she shuddered a little. "I'm surprised you even remember that. It was a long time ago." "Well, everything disappeared from the class so quickly, and when you came back, you never brought it up again. All the books were gone from the class library. All the letters were gone. Everything was missing. I think we talked about it for half of the 4th grade before something else caught our attention." She looked far away for a moment, as if contemplating whether she actually wanted to answer me or not. "I think I need a little air. Would you care to escort me?" I told her I would, and we left amidst a hail of catcalls about cradle robbers and cougars on the prowl. I'd taken her arm, and she was trying to be unbothered by it, but she was stiff and a little unsteady as we walked out onto the patio. Something had her spooked, and I didn't think it was the half-hearted teasing from her peers. When we came outside, she leaned against the railing outside the seating area, looking at the waves as they crashed against the water below us. I came to lean beside her, realizing she was trying to figure out how to begin, and having trouble getting started. "Are you sure you want to know? That's a pretty messed up story, but I suppose we could count it as a part of your education. Maybe it'll help you avoid something that got me in a lot of hot water and canceled the Flat Stanley project for the whole school. I told her I did, pretty intrigued with what could have happened to make a whole school ban something as benign as a kid's art project. Well, you remember that we sent the little guy around to the school the next town over? Well, then they sent it to another school, and that school sent it to another school, and so on and so forth. We had about the best results out of any of the classes, getting back about twice as much material as is normal. I started integrating it into the curriculum, as you remember, and it was such a huge part of our class. I appreciated the material. Sometimes it's hard to keep kids' attention when they're that young, but Stanley really helped. Then one day, I arrived to find a new package had come the day before. She stopped, shivering a little as she watched the waves. Someone had sent our Flat Stanley back, and I was excited as I opened the envelope. We were starting fractions that day. At least we were supposed to, and I wanted to see if there was some way I could work fractions into the package. I would get my wish, but not in the way I wanted. I had reached into my pocket for a cigarette, and Miss Gazel asked if she could have one. I had never seen her smoke before, but as she inhaled that first mouthful, she closed her eyes and looked euphoric. Flat Stanley was supposed to go to Carter Wild Elementary School in Boise, but it appeared he had gone somewhere else. You're too young to remember it, but there was a pretty terrible person in the Midwest in the late 90s. He was picking up young women who were hitchhiking. The police would find them later after he was done with them. Somehow, he got our Flat Stanley and thought it would be funny to use him to taunt the police. He had murdered 5 girls that week. Her voice broke as she said it, the tip of the cigarette jittering as she spoke, and attached pictures of them to the Stanley he sent back. They were horrific, and as I spilled them out of my desk, I recognized what I had at once. She was shaking, and as I put my jacket around her, she smiled ruefully at me. "You're a good kid, despite making me relive this. We knew that the kids in my class had all kinds of weird ideas about what had happened, but we also knew that none of you knew the truth." She took a long pull off the cigarette and let the ash dribble down. The first girl in the pictures was Ashley Manx. He had cut her chest open, the X going right between her breasts, and skinned her open like some kind of flower. Her face was set in the worst possible look you've ever seen, and right there in the middle of her chest was Flat Stanley. Your Flat Stanley. I thought I got it then, but Miss Gazel hadn't even gotten rolling yet. Then there was Frances Carmichael, the girl he took from the fair. She was looking for a ride, and he gave her one. He cut her arms and legs off while she was alive, burning the wounds closed with an iron so she'd bleed out slowly. Finally, he cut her throat, and after that, he put 1 foot from that Flat Stanley in her teeth and took a picture. He was standing upright, her body on display, and her burnt nubs are something I still can't quite get out of my head. I'm sorry, I started, but she cut me off. No, you wanted to know, so let me get it out. It's like the confessional I used to go to when I was little. If I get it all out, maybe it won't haunt me as bad. He got Dawn Cambridge and Betsy Cambridge next, split their backs, and made a pair of blood angels out of them. He set Flat Stanley in the middle of them, the crevice between their sides, and snapped a picture. They were still looking for them when they found Ashley. Finally, he got Melanie Fasterly, and she was probably the worst. He beat her with a sledgehammer until her bones were like glass shards. The picture he sent back was unrecognizable as a human being. If it hadn't been for the hair, I would never have known what it was. He stood the cutout between her lumpy legs as if to save her modesty, and she honestly looked about as flat as he was, if you don't count all the bone spurs sticking out of her. Mrs. Gazel was shaking, the shivering causing her to stutter over the last few words, and when she looked back at me, there was regret on her face. All the alcohol had been burned out of her, the fear having shaken it loose as her mind remembered what was likely the worst day of her life. I called the police, of course I did, but my real concern was for you guys. If this psycho had mailed this back to us, then he had the address of the school. If he knew where you were, then he could pay us a visit and make us his next photo collage, and I couldn't have lived with myself if that had happened. So I gave the police everything, and they agreed to keep an eye on the school for a while. I needn't have bothered. The twisted fuck had a particular hunting ground, and a particular prey, neither of which were children in Georgia. He never did pay us a visit, but it took 6 more girls before they caught him. I didn't sleep well until they had him in custody, and I didn't sleep soundly until they slipped the needle into his arm last year. He was a rotten, twisted individual, and he deserved every ounce of what he got. I had to take the rest of the week off to recover from his little present, and there was talk that they might want me to undergo counseling. When I got back, the school had scrapped all that flat Stanley stuff. It was too much of a risk that some student would get a hold of it next. And they couldn't have that. Some of the teachers thought we should tell the students. Some of them thought we should tell the parents, and a few of them thought that I should be fired for some reason. It was decided that we wouldn't tell any of them, and we would never speak of it again. In exchange for not causing an uproar, I got to keep my job. I thought it was a pretty fitting trade back then. So that's the whole sad story. Cure your curiosity? It did. Mrs. Gazel was right, too. They offered me a job at the end of my training, and it turned out it was her job. Mrs. Gazel retired at the end of the year, wanting to spend more time with her grandkids and her daughters. We still get drinks sometimes, and she really is a lovely woman. As for me, I noticed one major part of the contract that I was presented with. They put it in bold so you couldn't possibly miss it, so if you break it, you really only have yourself to blame. Under no circumstances will our students participate in any program that sends documents to other schools or entities without the express permission of administration. This includes pen pal programs, Hands Across the Water, the Flat Stanley Project, and other affiliated projects there within. I signed that contract 10 years ago, and now I instruct student teachers myself. In the decade I've been teaching, I've never broken that rule, and I have Mrs. Gazel's story to thank for that. When you send something like that out into the world, you never know who might answer back, and what they might have to say.